This video is made possible by my patrons on Patreon. Earlier this week, I played a D&D one-shot as Pestilus from Battlerite, but this wasn't a regular D&D session. First of all, I was playing Pestilus as a lawful evil character in an otherwise non-evil adventure, and if that wasn't weird enough, we played it with no Dungeon Master. But you know what? It was actually one of the best D&D sessions I've ever played, and I think the other guys in the group felt the same way. So much so that we've decided to postpone our regular campaign another week to continue with what should have been a one-shot adventure. Hello everyone, Xiomaro here, and welcome back to another video about Dungeons & Dragons. Finally. I'm going to be doing some quick start guides for getting into Dungeons & Dragons soon, TM, but actually there's something I wanted to talk about today because it nicely bridges the gap between Battlerite, my normal content, and Dungeons & Dragons, something that I'd like to do more of moving forward. Because this is more about the story, I'll brush over some of the mechanical stuff, but don't worry, I'll come back to it at a later date. So, on Monday night, I played a one-shot with my regular D&D group, but this one was a little different because one of our party was away, and we didn't want to push ahead with our regular campaign without him, so we decided to try something strange. We played a session without a Dungeon Master, and this is the part where the experienced D&D players are like, wait, what? I've been experimenting with a system called Mythic. It describes itself as a Game Master emulator, and although it does have its own RPG attached to it, you can also use it in place of a GM in any RPG. Some people have described it as reading the tea leaves, and I'd say that's a pretty apt description. Let's say you stumble upon an abandoned tower in the woods. You might ask, what does it look like this tower was used for? You'd then roll on the Mythic tables and get an answer like, harm plans. Then based on the surrounding circumstances, you'd come up with what that might mean. Maybe you decide that the tower was once a den for cultists who were trying to corrupt the forest or something like that. Likewise, you can ask yes or no questions and assign a likelihood to the answer being yes. For example, you walk into a chamber in a temple, is there a statue in the room? Maybe you decide that's very likely, so you roll to find out. We were also using another tool over at playeveryroll.com called the Solo Engine. There's a really cool adventure generator on there. If you want to check it out, we were playing the pre-made Grand Larceny adventure. Both that and Mythic are aimed at playing RPGs solo, but we were using them in place of a Dungeon Master. We were asking the questions and playing out the scenes, but ultimately the tables were in control. Both that and Mythic are aimed at playing RPGs solo, but we were using them in place of a Dungeon Master. We were asking questions and playing out the scenes, but ultimately the tables were in control. We also took it in turns to roleplay the NPCs we encountered. The tables told us their names, motivations, and that sort of thing. We would then play the NPCs based on what the tables told us. It's worth mentioning that all of us have been Dungeon Masters at one point or another, so that made it a lot easier. Anyway, enough about how we ran the game. I just thought I'd explain for the more experienced D&D players amongst you who might be a bit confused by the idea of playing without a DM. So usually we're a group of 3 players plus a Dungeon Master, but this Monday it was just 3 players and no Dungeon Master. We did literally 0 prep for the session. None of us knew what was going to happen. We didn't even decide which adventure we were going to play until we were all sat down together. This was also a relatively high level one-shot. We all started at level 14 with 1 rare magic item each. We had Sharuga, the Great Old One Warlock, equipped with a bag full of expensive stones for exotic spells. We had a Gunslinger Monk, yes I know, homebrewed, and he doesn't actually have a name known to the party, so we fondly just refer to him as this guy. He had some boots of spider climb for lots of wall walking shenanigans. And then we had me, Pestilus. I was looking through the list of rare magic items and stumbled upon the Staff of Swarming Insects. And without even telling you what that does sound quite Pestilus, right? I rolled him up as a Death Cleric, and I took things like Life Transference, which damages myself to heal my team. Sound familiar? And Vampiric Touch to heal myself back up by leeching enemies. I also took things like Blight, Contagion, Insect Plague, and all that good stuff. But honestly, none of that really mattered because we didn't really end up fighting very much. So, we started off the day in a town we came up with in a previous Mythic game from a few months ago. Mythic told us the town was oddly militaristic or something like that, so we had this image of a heavily fortified town with catapults and cannons lining the walls, but with no real militia to be found. I don't know if we actually came up with a real name for the town, but we just refer to it as Cannon Town because, well, because of all the cannons. So we're sitting around in the inn/tavern in Cannon Town, called The Drop-In, when we overhear one of the patrons, a local surgeon, gossiping about an ancient relic being held in a relatively nearby location. It's said that the relic can summon and control creatures from the Fey realm, but it's being kept under tight security for fear of it falling into the wrong hands. Being the ragtag, semi-evil group of felons we are, and probably the exact sort of hands to be described as the wrong ones, we approached this fine gentleman and gently pried as much information out of him as we could. We learned that this relic was a scepter that once belonged to a great king. It's said that only a worthy soul can harness its power, but the fact that it even exists has attracted a lot of unwelcome attention. We learn of a group of thieves who wanted to get hold of the scepter. I learned just enough about these people to cast the spell Scrying in order to spy on them from a distance and get a better understanding of where this scepter might be held. What we see is a group of people in black hoods marching towards a town down the valley from us. We recognise just enough from this vision to figure out where this scepter might be held, a town called Eldsdale. We set off right away as Eldsdale is a full day's ride from Cannon Town. Along the road, we roll to see if we encounter anything, and we do. So we got something along the lines of Mimic Fear or something like that. Just for a laugh, we decided that there was a mimic on the road. And a mimic is a creature that can make itself appear to be an inanimate object. They're often depicted as chests with teeth. So after checking how hard a mimic would be for 3 level 14 characters, we discovered it would take at least 5 of them to make it even remotely a challenge. So I described 5 ornate and identical chests placed along the side of the road, each chest more identical than the last. In a metagaming sense, we knew what it was, but our characters didn't, so I just brazenly walked up to the chests and tried to open one. And I'm sure you all know what's gonna happen next. Honestly, it was one of the only combat encounters of the session and it really wasn't that interesting, so I'm just gonna gloss over it. Blah blah blah, chest with teeth, blah blah blah, dead. Anyway, on arriving at Eldsdale, we found out it was a fairly remote mountain village guarded by Shaolin-style monks. Oh, and they were also gnomes. Why gnomes? I don't know. We just wanted them to speak a language none of us could understand. So we went with gnomes. Little kung fu gnomes. We rocked up to the gate and we were instantly stopped in our tracks by an elderly gnome. I mean, one of us had guns, one was clearly a warlock, and then you had me, Pestilus, Lord of the Swarm, complete with insects flying in and out of his ears. They immediately pegged us as the unsavory type they wanted to keep away from the town. Sharuga sure proved them wrong by casting Friends on the little guy. Friends is a spell that gives you advantage on social checks. It's basically social manipulation. Oh, and it only lasts for a minute, and when it ends, the person you cast it on becomes hostile towards you. Sharuga managed to persuade the monk that we actually lived in Eldsdale, and he ended up letting us through. At which point Sharuga was like, "Okay, nice to meet you, gotta go," to get away before the spell wore off. But just before entering the town, the gnome told us to be wary of Kaivan, the innkeeper. He's a thief and a charlatan apparently. So off we went to meet Kaivan. Why? Well, a thief and a charlatan might know a thing or two about the scepter and how to obtain it. Kaivan was a middle-aged looking elf and ran the inn called the Fires of Faraway. And this guy, he certainly lived up to his reputation. Multiple times he tried to rip us off with expensive rooms and crappy food, but we weren't gonna fall for it. Okay, we might have bought some of the crappy food, but hey, at least we got talking about the scepter. He told us he didn't really know much about the scepter, but he'd be able to point us to someone who did. There was a human living in a rundown building in town who seemed to be the go-to person for information. When we turned up to the house, we found Jennifer, the nefarious informant slash squatter, I guess. After a lot of persuasion and a little gold, she told us what we needed to know. The scepter was located in a secure and secret location known only to a few elite guards. Oh, and a twist. There was another group after the scepter. No, not the Black Hoods. Another group. These guys were elves from a region who sounded like they were very eager to get their hands on the scepter too. I managed to scry these elves as well, and guess what? They were already outside Eldsdale, and just like us, they were struggling to get in. But luckily, they didn't seem to have a psychopathic social manipulator like we did. So we talked it out and decided what our next course of action was. And we decided we should probably find one of these elite guards and work our manipulative magic on them too. After asking around a bit, we found Mira. Mira was a well-spoken human guard of Eldsdale, and as it turned out, she was indeed one of the people who might know the location of the scepter. And actually, to our advantage, she hated keeping hold of the scepter. She told us that the very existence of the scepter in Eldsdale has changed the town. The town was once a tranquil mountain town, but since they obtained the scepter, the town has become nothing but a target, and we persuaded her that we were totally good guys and we would only use it for good stuff. So she agreed to join our plot to steal the scepter, even if it was just to get her town back to normal. Mira let us in on a little secret. That night, the scepter was going to be moved from a secret holding place to an alchemy lab in the mountains. During transit would be the best time to grab the scepter, but there was a problem. She didn't know exactly where the scepter was held. There were 3 identical chests, but 2 of them were decoys. Each chest is guarded by one of the elite guards, and none of them knew which was the real one. Only one of the chests actually held the scepter. Our next move was to track the movements of the other guards. As it turned out, Mira had a bit of a quarrel with one of the other guards, Jaren, so she was somewhat okay with us manipulating her. Our warlock, Sharuga, has a 14th level feature called Create Thrall that can basically turn a humanoid into somewhat of a minion, or at least much easier to manipulate. It also allows you to communicate telepathically with your thrall. So, Mira agreed to summon Jaren to her office. We hid in order to ambush Jaren. Sharuga and the monk managed to hide easily, while me, big fat Pestilus, had a little more trouble hiding. I decided to just imitate a statue, and surprisingly I rolled pretty well on my stealth check. When Jaren arrived, she did clock the statue, and just as she was about to say, "Oh hey, nice statue," I cast harm, and boom, she didn't even see it coming. Our monk followed up with a stunning punch, and that stun gave Sharuga just the conditions he needed to make Jaren his thrall. Of course, poor Mira had no idea what was just about to happen, so she was quite perturbed. But hey, she's in too deep now, and she certainly wouldn't have wanted us to turn on her next. Next, we had to find the 3rd elite guard, a big douchebag Goliath called Peebles Lamar. This guy was clearly into something weird. He had way too much wealth for a guard, and he seemed to have expensive taste to match. We tracked him down to the local baths and managed to rummage through his stuff while he was in there. We discovered that the reason he was so wealthy was because he was being paid off by none other than the Black Hoods. Dun dun dun! And how did we know? We found a bloody contract between him and the Black Hoods in his slacks. What an idiot. So we now knew the location of, or had access to, all 3 guards and potentially all 3 chests. So we devised a plan. Sharuga and me, Pestilus, would tail Peebles. The monk would help Mira with her escort mission, and Jaren, well, she's Sharuga's thrall now, so she can be controlled remotely somewhat. That night, we tailed Peebles, and not 5 minutes went by before, surprise surprise, the Black Hoods turned up. We were far enough away to not be spotted, but close enough to hear desperation in their voices when they discovered that Peebles was carrying one of the decoys. Meanwhile, the monk decided to just try his luck. He fired a couple of well-placed shots into the locked chest, and it flung right open, and inside was the scepter. So of course he grabbed it. Of course everyone around heard the shots, and all the guards started dashing towards the noise. Sharuga quickly cast Fly on both of us so we could beat the guards to the scene. And when we got there, the monk had already managed to spider climb to the top of a nearby building, scepter in hand. We rolled a scene climax on the adventure generator, and we got something like this. As you finally get the item, another burglary happens in the same location, but for a different item. We decided it was probably the elves, but what were they stealing? We peered down from the rooftops to find Kyvan, you know, the sneaky innkeeper, carrying an elven child. We were like, what the hell? And then it clicked. Elves are actually of Fey ancestry, and remember how the staff can summon and control Fey creatures? And do you also remember how the power can only be harnessed by a worthy soul? What if this child was the chosen one? The one who could use the scepter? Pestilus quickly jumped into action and finally used his powers as Lord of the Swarm. I used my staff of swarming insects to summon, well, a swarm of insects. And this obscures basically everything inside the swarm, and only I can see within it. Still under the effects of Sharuga's fly spell, I jump down, pick up Kyvan, who is holding the child, and as quickly as I can, I fly away from town. No one can see what's inside the swarm, but from outside, all you can see is a 60-foot ball of insects. So Sharuga flies after me while the monk spider climbs and jumps across the rooftops. But just as we get over the walls of Eldsdale, an arrow comes hurtling towards Sharuga, and boom! His concentration drops on the fly spell, and we both come crashing to the ground. And that's where we ended the session. I really hope that I told this well enough, because genuinely it was one of the most exciting and intriguing sessions I've ever played. And to think it all came from random tables as well. I love watching and listening to D&D stories, and I particularly like Puffin Forest, if any of you guys have seen his videos. I really wish I could animate this stuff, because I feel like it really adds something to a story, but alas, I was not blessed blessed with artistic talent, but in any case, I hope you enjoyed hearing my story. I feel like the best way to sell someone on the idea of D&D is giving them examples, so I thought it'd be a cool way to, I don't know, it'd be cool to share this with you guys. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and feel free to share some of your stories down below. Take care guys, and I'll see you soon.